The rain fell like 1,000 gentle whispers against the cracked pavement outside Joe's Groceries, each droplet carrying with it the promise of something more than just another dreary Tuesday evening, and as Emma Martinez hurried toward the warm glow of the little corner store, her ponytail bouncing with each hurried step, she had no idea that this ordinary moment would become the turning point of her entire life. The fluorescent lights inside cast a welcoming amber hue through the rain-streaked windows, and she could already imagine the comfort of her small apartment waiting for her after another long day of pushing papers and fielding calls at Davidson and Associates, where she'd worked for 3 years as a junior marketing coordinator, invisible among the sea of suits and ambition that filled the gleaming downtown office tower. She pushed through the heavy glass door, the familiar chime announcing her arrival to Mrs. Patterson, who waved from behind the register with the same motherly smile she'd worn for the past 20 years, and Emma made her way through the narrow aisles, gathering the essentials, a carton of milk, some bread, a small bunch of bananas that had seen better days but would do for her morning smoothies, when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of something crashing to the floor, followed by a frustrated sigh that seemed to echo with more than just annoyance at spilled groceries. She turned the corner to find a man crouched beside what had once been a neat paper bag, now reduced to a soggy mess on the linoleum floor, canned goods rolling in different directions like scattered thoughts, apples bruised and rolling toward the dairy case, and a carton of eggs cracked open like broken promises spilling their contents across the cold tiles. He was dressed in a simple gray sweater and dark jeans, his hair tousled from the rain, and there was something about the way his shoulders sagged, not just from the weight of his ruined groceries, but from something deeper, something that spoke of exhaustion that went beyond the physical, that made Emma's heart clench with recognition, because she knew that feeling, that bone-deep weariness of trying to hold everything together when life seemed determined to let it all fall apart. Without a second thought, she set down her own basket and dropped to her knees beside him, her hands already reaching for the nearest can of soup, and when he looked up at her with eyes the color of stormy seas, wide with surprise and something that might have been gratitude, she felt something shift inside her chest, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't even known existed. "Let me help," she said simply, her voice soft but firm, and together they began the careful work of salvaging what they could, their hands occasionally brushing as they reached for the same item, sending tiny electric shocks up her arm that she tried to ignore, focusing instead on the task at hand, but she couldn't help noticing the way he moved with quiet grace despite his obvious frustration, or how his voice carried a gentle warmth when he thanked her for each retrieved item, as if her small kindness was the most precious gift he'd received in years. The rain continued its relentless drumming against the windows, creating a cocoon of intimacy around them as they worked, and when Mrs. Patterson appeared with a mop and a fresh paper bag, clucking sympathetically over the mess, Emma found herself genuinely reluctant for this unexpected moment to end, this brief connection with a stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger at all. As they stood together, his groceries now safely contained in their new home, he turned to her with an expression so earnest, so grateful, that it took her breath away, and when he said, "I can't thank you enough, you didn't have to stop, but you did, and that means more than you know," she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, because she could hear something in his voice that spoke of loneliness, of a life where small kindnesses were rare and precious things. They stood there for a moment longer than necessary, the silence stretching between them like a bridge neither quite knew how to cross, and Emma found herself memorizing the details of his face, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled, the genuine warmth that radiated from him despite the exhaustion she could see weighing on his shoulders, before the spell was broken by the arrival of another customer, and they stepped apart with the awkward shuffle of two people who had shared something meaningful but temporary. He insisted on paying for her groceries despite her protests, and as they walked toward the door together, the rain still falling in sheets outside, he paused and said, "I hope we meet again someday," with such sincerity that Emma felt her cheeks flush, and she responded with a smile that felt like sunshine breaking through clouds, "Me too," though she knew the chances were slim in a city of 500,000 souls, each carrying their own stories, their own struggles, their own small moments of grace. The next morning dawned gray and drizzling, as if the sky couldn't quite decide whether to continue yesterday's tears or offer the promise of sunshine, and Emma hurried through the familiar ritual of her commute, coffee that was never quite hot enough, a subway ride pressed shoulder to shoulder with strangers who avoided eye contact, the elevator ride to the 15th floor where Davidson and Associates occupied 3 floors of gleaming corporate efficiency. She settled into her small cubicle, the same beige walls and fluorescent lighting that had been her daily reality for 3 years, and tried to focus on the pile of reports that needed reviewing, but her mind kept drifting back to the stranger from the grocery store, wondering if he'd made it home safely in the rain, if his rescued groceries had provided him with a decent dinner, if he was thinking about their brief encounter with the same bemused warmth that kept creeping into her thoughts. The morning passed in its usual rhythm of emails and phone calls, of coffee runs and small talk with her colleague Sarah, who occupied the cubicle beside hers and served as both confidant and partner in their shared observations about office politics and the mysterious ways of corporate leadership, until the announcement came crackling over the intercom that would change everything. All staff were to report to the main conference room for an important meeting with the company's new CEO, who would be introducing himself and sharing his vision for the company's future. Emma joined the stream of employees making their way to the large conference room, a space she'd only been in a handful of times for company-wide meetings and the occasional holiday party, and as she found a seat near the back, she couldn't help but notice the nervous energy in the room, the whispered conversations about what changes the new leadership might bring, whether jobs were secure, whether their small corner of the corporate world would remain stable or be swept away in whatever transformation was coming. The room fell silent as the door opened, and Emma looked up from her phone where she'd been nervously scrolling through nothing in particular, and felt the world tilt sideways as the new CEO walked into the room, tall, confident, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit that transformed him completely from the rain-soaked stranger she'd helped the night before, yet unmistakably the same man whose eyes had held such gratitude, whose voice had carried such warmth, whose simple "thank you" had somehow reached into her chest and rearranged something fundamental about how she saw the world. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and she watched as recognition dawned on his face, followed by something that looked like wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe the cosmic coincidence that had brought them together again, and Emma felt her cheeks burning with a mixture of embarrassment and something else she couldn't quite name as whispers began to ripple through the room, curious glances in her direction, raised eyebrows. The kind of office gossip that could make or break a career, depending on how it was interpreted. Over the following weeks, as James, she'd learned his name was James Harrison, and he was only 34, younger than anyone had expected for such a position, began implementing changes throughout the company. Emma found herself caught in a strange limbo between her ordinary life and something extraordinary, because while he maintained perfect professional behavior during meetings and company interactions, she couldn't miss the way his eyes would find hers across a crowded room, or how he seemed to genuinely listen when she contributed ideas during brainstorming sessions, treating her insights with a respect that both thrilled and terrified her. The office buzzed with speculation about their connection, some colleagues suggesting she was receiving special treatment, others wondering if there was something romantic brewing between them, and Emma found herself walking a tightrope between maintaining her integrity and navigating the complex dynamics of a workplace where perception often mattered more than reality. But through it all, she began to see the man behind the title, someone who arrived early and stayed late not out of ambition, but out of genuine care for the people whose livelihoods depended on his decisions, who remembered the names and birthdays of employees at every level, who had transformed their quarterly meetings from dreaded corporate obligations into genuine conversations about making their work more meaningful and their workplace more human. It was during one of these late evenings, when most of the office had emptied and Emma was finishing up a project that had proven more complex than expected, that James appeared at her cubicle with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that was equal parts nervous and hopeful, and when he asked if she had a few minutes to talk, she knew this conversation would either change everything or complicate everything beyond repair. They found themselves in his office, the city lights twinkling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, and as they sat across from each other with their cooling coffee, James began to speak in that same gentle voice she remembered from the grocery store, telling her how that night in the rain had reminded him why he'd wanted to go into business in the first place, not for profit or prestige, but to create something meaningful, to build a company where people felt valued and seen, where kindness wasn't seen as weakness but as the foundation of true leadership, and how her simple act of helping a stranger pick up his groceries had crystallized everything he wanted to achieve in his new role, because if someone could show such grace to a